Welcome back to Talking Truth Ministries, where my goal is to share the truth, whatever it might be, to as many as I can, especially in this world that is full of constant deception and lies. So, it's time for chapter 3 of the History of the Origin of the Trinity by Robert McFarland. 2000 BC, the Assyrians. We will use the term Assyrians to include the Parthians, Seleucids, Chaldeans, Medians, all of them having been subsequent ruling parties over the next 1500 years prior to the time of the Greeks. Nelson Glick, in his book Deities and Dolphins, gives us a glimpse of these times. The primary god of the Assyrians was Hadad. He was the superior god in every way. He was usually sculpted with two bulls, one on either side of him, and was, among other designations, referred to as the god of thunder, or the sun. S-U-N, sun. He was usually accompanied by his spouse, referred to as a Targetus of the moon. A Targetus was usually sculpted with a set of lions on either side of her and was the recipient of the gifts or offerings which were presumably shared with Hadad. She was usually found with a zodiac belt draped over her shoulder and down to her waist. Sometimes the 12 signs were displayed in front and back, but in cases where she was carved in bas relief, her 12 signs were displayed in the front side only. The most unusual depiction is the hairdo of this lady. Since the earth was so instrumental in giving birth and sustaining lives, there were a number of depictions of the third part of this deity. Sometimes there were sheaves of grain protruding from her hairdo. Sometimes there were various fruits sticking out. Sometimes there were combinations of fruit and wheat sheaves. Amazingly, even dolphins were in her hair, and that in a place as arid as the Jordanian desert. But that happened 1,000 years later. It is significant that we can easily identify these two deities because of the identical images appear on all statues spanning these 1,500 years. Due to this facial continuity, we can now see that the Hadad of the Assyrians became the Zeus of the Greeks and continued to ultimately become the Jupiter of the Romans. Atargatis, too, retained her original facial characteristics and continued to be recognizable through this period of time. There is still considerable conjecture concerning the dolphins in the desert. However, the most plausible explanation of their presence lies in the following. Most travel from east to west forced one to cross some desert and eventually some sea. Evidence has shown that in the desert, daily temperatures can exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius. So the common practice was to travel during the night. Thus, the moon became quite a friendly face on that desert skyscape. In time, the sun became the god to keep at a great distance, and the moon became the god to draw close to. As part of the journey demanded crossing some water, dolphins were ever-present companions of the seafarers and were rewarded with a permanent recognition carved in stone. As the concepts of a lunar cycle and a female cycle are closely related, the idea evolved that procreation was directly related to the moon. Also, as travelers encountered various advantages and disadvantages on the road, the advantages were passed on as lunar blessings, and the disadvantages were likewise passed on as lunar curses. Consequently, procedures were developed for thankful offerings for blessings and appeasement offerings for curses. Interestingly, Petra, the ancient capital city of the founders of the Old Spice Road, the Nabateans, has now been archaeologically rebuilt to include the original 21 stations or sanctuaries of worship where travelers should leave offerings as they departed the capital. They believed protection was needed for their caravans and goods by the various deities, and that thanks had to be offered in order to ensure safe transportation. These 21 stations are only visible as one is exiting the Sikh. or the narrow passage in the rock to begin a treacherous journey into the great unknown. On the other hand, there is yet an unknown number of receiving sanctuaries still in the discovery stage to welcome the weary travelers as they return with great abundance. The priests were able to extract offerings from the same people, both going and coming. One can only imagine how much time was required to traverse the approximately 1/2 mile or 1,600-meter entranceway and exit through the same seek. As we understand that the majority of all intercontinental travel was achieved during the night, it only stands to reason that the earthly mentality of blessings and curses according to adventure and misadventure based on surrounding nature, Earth, would also be projected to the zodiac signs at the same occurrence of the adventure or misadventure. Moon. Archaeology supports this observation. Consequently, the zodiac infusion was present in all later multi-deity worship. But one must also conclude that the main worship in the Assyrian camp was still the 3 high gods. Number 1 always remained intact. Hadad, or the sun. Number 2 was and is always intact, Targatus, the moon. And the third was and is just as intact as ever, nature, or earth itself. While it is not quite certain how the interaction of the gods to procreate might occur, it is certain that they are definitely bound by a family relationship. This led to yet another enterprising concept. As the Sumerians had made physical likenesses to place for the various gods in their absence, the 1,000-year evolution now allowed the priests to fabricate a likeness of any certain god to be carried with the respondent on all subsequent journeys. From a marketing standpoint, this offered the greatest control of the priests over the masses. Priests were now able to create and dissolve new and old gods on demand and charge for the sale of any and all likenesses sold along the way, for as an old associate of this author was known to repeat, whatever the market would bear. Now let us look at the Egyptians, who saw the matter of the family in a slightly different light. And that concludes chapter 3. Thank you for listening.